Okay, hello everyone, and welcome you here. Today I'm really happy to see you, and we're going to start a course of studies which is devoted to the world or international economics. And today, this course of studies, these lectures, I've read this course of studies at the Moscow Technological Institute. I've prepared some of the lectures for this institute, and I'm going to teach you world economy and international economic relations as a unified system. And today is going to be it's a series of 5 lectures. I think, yeah, this is a series of 5 lectures. In lecture 1 we're going to talk a little bit about world economy and how it works. And in lecture 2 we're going to study the international division of labor as an international basis, as the basis for international economic relations. In lecture 3 there will be some information about international trade as an integral part of economic relations. Lecture 4, international production, and finally international financial economy is going to be a final lecture. So today lecture 1 is called World Economy and International Economic Relations as a Unified System. In this lecture we're going to study the processes of internationalization, transnationalization and globalization, because they are the general trends of the economic relations, international economic relations. These phenomena are really important to know because they are the whole world is dependent upon these general processes. They're universal, you cannot stop them. These processes are really fundamental for the global economy because they try to unify the whole system, and this way we're going to understand the workings of international system of currency, the international system of labor division, the international system of international trade, and things such as these. They are the contemporary basis of the world economy. And then we go into classify the elements of the international economic relations, and finally we're going to understand the workings of the world economy today. The results we're going to achieve by the end of this lecture include skills and knowledge, which are required to understand the international economic relations system and how it works again. We're going to acquire some of the competences we need in making the most important differences between the 3 stages of globalization, being internationalization, transnationalization, and globalization itself in the end. Well, what is a contemporary world economy? The contemporary world economy is not just a combination of nations and peoples living in it and countries. If we look at a map of the world economy map, or just a world political map, we'll see many countries. We'll see that there are more than 200 countries, independent countries in the world today, and these countries are just the world is combined, is constituted of countries. But the world economy and the world economics in particular, they are the world economy is not just a combination of these nations and countries. The world economy is better understood through the interconnections between countries and nations. And these interconnections include flows of capital, flows of goods and services, international labor, and things such as these. The global economy is also a very turbulent place, so to speak. It's an international market where everybody is connected to each other, where economic actors are dependent upon each other. They should rely upon each other. The international relations of capitalism is a system where you should be aware of the existing threats and opportunities in the business area and in the international marketplace. You cannot be independent in this system. In this system, everybody is interconnected, and this is one of the features of the global economic conditions that are required to establish the international system of economic relations and things such as these. Everyone, again, how can we understand that everything is dependent upon each other and everybody is dependent upon each other in this system? We can understand this in times of crisis, especially in times of crisis. If a crisis starts in a particular nation, and this nation, for example, buys some goods and services from other nations, then those countries exporting their goods to those nations hit by the crisis are going to be hit by this crisis as well, because they are not going to purchase your products in the end. Both policymakers and business leaders in every country must now pay attention to what sometimes rapidly changing economic fortunes halfway around the world. For instance, global economic crisis. And global economic crisis is a thing which again shows the interconnectedness between nations and the people in this economy. What is economic interdependence? Economic dependence says, this is actually a term which shows that there are some nations again in this world and they do not live separately. If you separate some economies from each other, these economies are not going to work really effectively. The effectiveness of the global economy is heavily dependent upon the effectiveness of the workings of some of the greatest nations on the planet. And the greatest nations on the planet are the G7 most developed countries. They are the United States of America, Great Britain, Japan, Germany, Italy, Canada, France. These nations are the most important nations on the planet. They produce the majority of goods and services. And then of course we've got 5 more countries, the BRICS nations, which are really, they are the most developed among the developing or emerging economies. Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. South Africa is the most important economy in Africa, the most developed economy in Africa. China and India are the largest economies and the greatest populations. The majority of people live in India and China. If we combine the populations of China and India, we'll get something like 40% of the world population. and that means that the labor force, the labor market is really the world economic, or the international market is heavily dependent upon the international labor, which is flown out of the China and India in particular. They develop new technologies. India is the greatest provider of international technology. It's the largest producer of pharmaceutical products and things like that. It dominates the market of the pharmaceutical products, and it dominates the international software industry. China dominates the hardware industry. They produce more than 90% of all computers and things such as these. China is the world factory, so to speak. And China is a part of the global chain of production. If we exclude China out of the production chain, that would mean economic crisis, world economic crisis actually. Because again, each and every nation on the planet, especially such countries such as China, cannot be thrown away from the world economic system. And the partnerships, the relations between some of the nations, some of the most important nations, are formed by these particular industries and countries living in this kind of system. So they are really important, and I feel like you cannot exclude countries such as China, India, Russia, Brazil. You cannot exclude them from the world economic system, because Russia provides resources, China provides labor, India provides international technology and software. Brazil, like Russia, provides natural resources, including some minerals, coffee, Brazilian coffee, and things such as these, agricultural products. South Africa delivers gold and other precious metals and precious stones, so they are really important. Next, when we go global, what does it mean, going global? Companies going global, that means in each nation on the planet, in particular the most developed countries on this planet, have their own international corporations, and these international or transnational corporations are working on the global market, in the global marketplace. They've got their own niche on in the international marketplace, and they deliver goods and services which are in great demand. They are monopolies, they are also monopolies in the global market, because they produce the majority of all goods and services. And there are some ratings showing that, for example, we've got a Fortune Global 500 list of the greatest companies on the planet. They produce more than 40% of the global GDP. Can you imagine that? 500 transnational corporations produce over 40% of all the products that the world is producing from year to year. And this is phenomenal. International corporations, the number of international corporations or transnational corporations is growing from year to year. Today it's something like 84,000 corporations, and out of all these 84,000 corporations, 500 corporations produce over 40% of the global GDP. Then we've got Forbes Global 2000 Index, and these companies, 2,000 companies, produce over 50% of the global GDP. That means 1,500 corporations, which follow the 500 biggest corporations, produce only 10% of the global GDP. And if you go further, the amount of the share of the global GDP produced by the international corporations is going to decrease. In order to compare, to understand whether it's much, whether it's little, these 84,000 corporations. In Germany, there are 3.2 million small and middle-sized enterprises, and they produce only 49% of Germany's GDP, whereas 500 biggest corporations in the world produce 43% of the global GDP. So today, the global economy is dependent upon the international corporations in particular, and they produce the overwhelming majority of all goods and services. GDP of individual countries are also important in the economy. In this graph, GDP forecasts for 2014, there were prognoses that these countries such as Mongolia, Macau, Sierra Leone, Timor-Leste, Turkmenistan, Bhutan, Laos, Congo, Iraq, Tanzania are going to be the fastest growing nations on the planet. For instance, Mongolia is going to grow something like 15%. Macau 13 to 14%, etc. Actually, these are most prospective nations among countries of Asia and Africa, and they are going to lead the economic growth in the developing world, among the most developed emerging market economies. And these countries are the best offer best investment opportunities for banks, for international corporations. So they may invest their cash, their capital flows, their capital actually into these nations and receive much profit, get really profited. What is international cooperation? International cooperation is really important for the nations, for the countries, because again, they cannot live without each other. They are independent, and they organize conferences, press conferences, in order to exchange the modern ideas about the structure of the world economy and the international system. They collectively decide the most important questions and issues concerning the world economic crisis. For instance, there were many summits, the G20 summits in 2008, 2016, and these summits were devoted to the problems of the international financial system, because this system is really turbulent. There were many crises, financial crises in the past, starting like from the late 1980s. There were crises and they repeated. these crises really damaged the world economy and particular economies as well, national economies. For instance, in the late 1990s, there was a serious crisis in Asia. It was called the Asian financial crisis of 1997-1998. It hit South Korea, it hit Vietnam, it hit Japan. And Japan had a decade of deflation because of the crisis. China was not so really hit by this crisis. In Russia, in 1998, there was a serious financial crisis. There was actually a default. Russia defaulted on its foreign debt, and we had to make our way through this crisis. And by the end of early 2000s, we've got a political change, and this political change brought with it new challenges. It brought with it high oil prices, which really helped the Russian economy get back on its feet. And today we live, in 2008-2010 there was the biggest world financial crisis, which hit almost each and every nation on the planet. It hit the United States, was the source of this crisis. There was the subprime mortgage crisis, and many nations were involved because the United States is the biggest market, and those countries that exported their products to the world or international economics is a science that uses the same fundamental methods of analysis like any other sciences which we've got. Economics actually studies relationships between economic actors, between companies, markets. World economics or international economics studies great entities. It studies the international economic relations such as international trade, international division of labor, regional economic integration or international economic integration. It studies transnational corporations and their business activities across the globe, and they do some of the domestic activities as well, because they are nation-based entities. Transnational corporations are based in nations such as the majority of all international corporations are based in the United States and Europe. The European Union, I think, is the largest provider of one of the largest providers of capital, like the United States, and these countries. Actually, the European Union is not a country; it's a combination of countries. But still, as an entity, it is a real global player, which is a really great competitor to the United States in the global economy. They've got their own currency, and they've got their own enterprises, brands, and things such as this. So this is a great competitor, and the competitiveness of the European Union can be compared with the competitiveness of the United States. World or international economics also involves new and different concerns, because international trade and investment occur between independent nations, and because they are independent, they should really negotiate, and they should find some ways to cooperate. They should find solutions to global economic crisis, financial crisis, and things such as this. They determine directions of the world economic developments, of the global growth. The subject matter of world or international economics. It includes the gains from trade. Trade, actually, or international trade, is the starting point of all economic relations, because as soon as countries understood what kind of goods and services they produce best of all in comparison to other nations, they started trading with each other. They started delivering their best products at the lowest, at the best price, and this was the starting point for international division of labor. Britain produced, for instance, Britain produced wool, France produced wine, Portugal produced wine, and some other countries like Italy, they provided capital. Italy in those days, in the 16th century, in the 17th century, was the greatest banker that provided capital to the rest of the world. Many kings in the 16th and 17th centuries turned to Italian banks for capital. English kings, for instance, they turned to Italian banks in Florence, and one English king, I believe George or something, he wanted to go on war. He claimed some of the territories in France and he needed money, and he turned to Italian bankers in Florence, and after some time he did not win the war. Things started to accumulate heavily, and this war threatened the national security of Great Britain, and Great Britain lost money, and the king refused to repay the debt, and this led to the collapse of some Italian banks, and they collapsed, and that brought financial and economic crisis in Italy. There was a series of bankruptcies, and there was a financial crisis. So this is really a dangerous situation when someone is not paying debt. Protectionism. Protectionism actually is a policy which allows us to protect our homegrown industries. We've got, each nation has its own unique industries, and we should produce these products because our national security and independence of the economy is dependent upon the production of its own goods and services. So we cannot we cannot do without these industries. We should really protect them, and we should protect them from competition from abroad, because they can also produce some analogous products, and they may they may deliver their products to Russia, for instance, and if Russia is not going to produce analogous products, it's going to fail, like it was in the early 1990s, when there was a period of really harsh economic conditions, and this was again a period of economic crisis. And we should really understand that the economy of Russia was really dependent upon imports, and still is dependent upon imports because of the mistakes made during the early 1990s. Then, of course, final issue in the subject matter of world international economics is the international capital market. The international capital market is the provider of investments, and investments are really the blood of the international economy, because corporations invest money into industries across the globe, and these investments become the cornerstone of economic growth, of the global economic growth, because transnational corporations provide jobs, they provide technology, and this leads to international or global economic growth in the end. What is the economics of the world or international economy? It is the study of international trade and the study of international money. International trade, like I said, is one of the most important industries in the global economy, because international trade tries to link some nations, the majority of nations on the planet, and it provides the opportunity for selling your goods and services to other nations and receive more profits than you would otherwise have done if you were just a local company and you just worked on the national market. Because your market can be saturated with your products and nobody needs them, these products. Well, actually we need those products, but the market is saturated, the demand is satisfied, but you are ready to produce more and more of these goods and services. And what is actually a solution to this? You may go to the international market, you may go to other countries, export your products and produce even more, and this would bring more profit to your company. It would bring prosperous life to your company. It would expand. You may build some new subsidiaries in other countries. You may enlarge your business. You may go to China and use cheaper labor force there. You may outsource some of your trading activities, some of the production facilities. And then, of course, international money is also a very important issue, because we cannot do without money. International money is the basis for exchange in goods and services. International money is used in order to pay for exports and imports in other countries. Each and every nation on the planet has its own currency, and when we export goods and services and import and export goods and services, we should really know what is the exchange rate of our currency against the currency of the nation where we export our products. For instance, we should know, if we trade with China, we should really know the exchange rate of the Russian ruble to the Chinese yuan. And in particular, of course, international trade actually is by 80%, more than 80%, 87, 88% is really dependent upon the dollar. The majority of transactions across the globe are done in the US dollars. So each country on the planet sets the dollar to the national currency exchange rate in order to be able to work in this international system of currency, in the international system of trade and things such as this. And the international money theory focuses on the monetary side of the international economy, on financial transactions such as foreign purchases of US dollars. Next issue which we're going to study, this is actually question 2 of the lecture. General trends in the contemporary world economy's dynamics. We participate in the global economy by the way of international division of labor, which is the most essential component of economic development in the nations across the globe. We cannot do without these institutions. We cannot do without the system which determines the way the international business is done. And the international business really determines the global economic growth. It determines international processes such as globalization and transnationalization as well. Globalization is a point where everything is being being intertwined and interconnected, like we said previously. This sets a general trend. In particular, this is the world system. This is the system, and this is the process. Actually, globalization is not a system. Truly, globalization is. We can say that globalization is part of general trends that develop the international system of trade. It changes the international system of trade and the international system of finance. They are becoming, these processes determine the way the world economy is working today, and every economic actor and each nation state are going to be included in this structure, and you cannot go without the globalization. You would just be thrown. You're going to be thrown away if you're not participating in the globalization. It doesn't mean that it's not going to